Prototyping aids and simplifies your work as a product manager. Prototypes enable you to confidently create value for customers, which is the primary objective of a product manager. We need to use prototypes wisely to discover what satisfies and even delights customers, validating these solutions before bringing them to the market. In this episode, you'll learn about using prototypes to design products customers love. Joining us is Dr. Matthew Wettergreen. He is an associate teaching professor at the Oshman Engineering Design Kitchen at Rice University in Houston, Texas. Matthew co-developed 6 of the 7 engineering design courses in the design curriculum and currently instructs many of these courses as well, including the first-year Engineering Design and Prototyping and Fabrication course. His design work has been featured on the cover of NASA Tech Briefs and in the pages of Atlantic Monthly. Let's jump in and learn how to make better use of prototyping.
How can you unlock your full potential as a product manager? We're sharing the product management insights you need. They are based on the 7 research-backed knowledge areas for product mastery. You'll learn to create products customers love, enhance your influence, and elevate your career. Welcome to Product Mastery Now, hosted by Dr. Chad McAllister, product management professor, practitioner, and your guide.
Matthew, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about prototyping with anybody who will listen.
And for those that are watching on YouTube, Matthew, you're sitting in an interesting place. I do want to find out about what is this Oshman Engineering Design Kitchen? What takes place there?
Excellent. Well, I'm happy to talk to you about it. So I'm on the campus of Rice University in Houston, Texas. I'm in the Oshman Engineering Design Kitchen. We also call it the kitchen or the OEDK. I'm going to move away right now, and I'm just going to turn so you can see some of the things that I'm looking at in the conference room that I'm at. The Oshman Engineering Design Kitchen is a 20,000 square foot facility where we are the beating heart of engineering prototyping on campus at Rice. It is where all of our design classes are taught. It is where most of the students in all of engineering at Rice will take at least one class. And it's where we run real world projects and have since the facility opened in 2009.
Fantastic. So it sounds like there's a lot of sophisticated equipment in the space.
That's actually really important to know. So the OEDK, when it opened, was one of the first academic makerspaces or design studios or prototyping buildings in the nation. There are a number that predate us and have existed for a long period of time, MIT's, Stanford's, but there's a new breed of these academic makerspaces, and OEDK was at the forefront of that. And when we opened, our goal was to provide a location for students who are in senior capstone, electrical, mechanical, and bioengineering, to all work together in our collaborative capstone class. And what it evolved into, based on student interest and industry telling us that they were looking for students who had not just analytical abilities, but also teaming abilities and professional skills. What it turned into was a home for academic engineering excellence, where students could take classes in engineering classes or take classes in design or learn how to prototype. So we would be classified as a high resource or highly resourced design studio. We have state-of-the-art machines that you can use to make things in 2 dimensions, digitally, and in 3 dimensions. We also have a machine shop and a wood shop. We have some of the best machines in this facility that you could use to make any number of products that could be sort of indistinguishable with something that you would see off of the shelf in a store.
What a great resource for students and for working on projects and then with local industry and others as well there. I did watch your TEDx talk that you did a few years ago talking about prototyping and the value of teaching students to make use of cardboard and glue and ping pong balls and anything that you find around you. And yet you have this incredible kitchen makerspace. Well, why is it that you're trying to teach students to use these basic materials?
And I appreciate you asking that question. There's an incredible cognitive dissonance that people experience when they hear me talk about all of the different machines we have at the OEDK, and yet we choose to teach students with cardboard and glue. And to understand why we do that, I have to talk a little bit about my work. And my work is in teaching students design excellence and in teaching them the design process. And when the OEDK started doing this in 2009, as I mentioned, we were early. So by 2013 and 14, we had already worked out some of the best practices for academic makerspaces. And as we were visited by individuals around the world, there became interest in us traveling to other locations and teaching them how to start not only these makerspaces, but design-focused programs and also employing best research practices for student-centered classrooms instead of lecture-centered classrooms. I actually spend my summers traveling internationally, teaching faculty and institutions how to start places just like the 𝐸DK. And I do that with a group of friends. Now, in my free time, my wife and I love to travel. And when we travel, we go to places that I also travel to for this work. There are two places that I like to go when I travel anywhere that I think would help my students in product design or in their design work. And the first place that I go, my wife joins me, and that's a market. When I go into a market in a local community, I feel like I can learn 51% of everything there is to know about that culture, what they value, what they use, what they eat, the flavors of the food that they eat, the general spice level of their food. When I go to a hardware store in a local community, I can learn how things are built, whether they're built from scratch and raw materials, or whether they're ordered, or whether they're built from an assemblage of components. And then the second place that I go when I visit, my wife refuses to go with me, and that's the dump. It's the trash heap. I love to go to the trash heap and the dump because you can learn the other half of everything you need to know about a culture. You can learn what no longer has value. You can learn what is used up. And in some locations, what is used up becomes reused again. And in this perfect circular economy, of which I've only seen one really great example, is in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa. And in Ethiopia, the Addis Ababa market is the largest market on the continent. And I had the opportunity to walk it for the entire day. And when I was in the Addis Ababa market, I was looking for wood and plastic, and I knew what wood and plastic looked like. Wood was uniformly cut, and plastic was transparent or translucent and had this shape. And I did not find it at all. What I instead found were these eucalyptus trunks, which are used as a wood substitute there for scaffolding all around buildings, and these plastic jugs, which hold the palm oil that is used for cooking. And I had a crisis of faith that I would not be able to teach prototyping to faculty. Then I saw this. This is a highway divider that I saw all over Ethiopia as we were traveling. And it is made from these tubs of palm oil that are cut up and then assembled. And what I realized in that one moment was that obviously I was wrong about how wood and plastic looked. But what I was also wrong about was that I had to have specific materials in order to build my solution. Instead, I needed to think about the general qualities of the materials that I had around me in order to produce what I was trying to achieve. And in these situations where I have seen this around the world, most of the world builds not with low budget, but with no budget. And our students at the 𝐸DK have the opportunity to use a highly resourced makerspace with the best machines and the greatest available materials for them. But they are not always going to have the 𝐸DK available to them. And they may be in places around the world or around the United States or in their garage where they do not have all of these tools and machines. And so at the 𝐸DK, as a starting point for everybody's work, we start with no budget, and they build using readily available materials. Because it is far more likely that our students will find themselves in a no budget situation than in the highest resource situation. And they need to be able to build in all of these conditions. And that is why at the 𝐸DK, we start with low fidelity prototyping for everybody.
Okay, so the key reason there is because this is what your students may encounter in the real world. The other thing I think about is it's approachable and easy, right? You give a person some cardboard, some hot glue, some paper clips, some tape, scissors. You can get a lot done, surprisingly, in a very short amount of time to create a physical prototype.
Yeah, and not only that, counterintuitively, students produce more prototypes by using these low fidelity materials and the ultimate fidelity and resolution and functionality is higher if they start with lower fidelity prototypes, rather
Okay.
than if they jump straight to something that would involve machining or 3D printing.
Okay. And just to be clear about our concepts, you've introduced low fidelity prototypes, so we should probably talk about fidelity a little bit, and maybe just about prototyping itself, how you think about the prototyping process.
Yeah, so the simple way that we talk about prototyping is as a method of problem solving, which creates physical or digital objects, or we call them artifacts.
Hmm.
Prototypes can be napkin sketches, they can be semi-detailed drawings that communicate intention and physicality. They can be made of the wrong materials, at the wrong scale, and at the wrong proportions, but they can show what you intend the final solution to be. And they can use analogous materials. Shown here in the top middle, we have plastic, we have pipe cleaners, and we have yellow foam. This is ultimately going to be a flotation device. And you can see that the plastic forms a volume around the pipe cleaners. Prototypes can be digital and they can exist only as the function of what you intend to solve. Prototypes can be unsafe to use but functional, such as this forearm rotation measuring device. There are a lot of sharp corners. This would never be acceptable in a pediatric setting. Or prototypes can be both functional and aesthetically pleasing. Now, just to hone in on the terminology, there are lots of different types of prototypes, but we like to bin them into 3 categories. And the categories that we use are low fidelity, medium fidelity, and high fidelity. And we typically talk about it with respect to these superheroes of prototyping. MacGyver is the low fidelity prototyping superhero. Shown here is the 80s MacGyver with Richard Dean
Love the
Anderson.
80s MacGyver. Absolutely.
I do too. And he's one of the main reasons I became an engineer.
Love it.
So MacGyver's multi-tool is a paperclip. He can solve anything with a paperclip. On the
Paperclip
high
and duct
end,
tape, amazing.
yeah, absolutely. And it's true. You can actually do that in your life. On the high fidelity side, we have Tony Stark's Iron Man costume or Riri Williams' Ironheart. These are objects of undeniable beauty. They have gone through multiple revisions. They do everything they intend to do, and they do it well. They're aesthetically pleasing. In the middle, we have craftspeople who study for very long periods of time in order to produce individual objects that might last a lifetime rather than a set number of uses. And this might be people who buy and sell things on Etsy. Low fidelity prototypes are what we use, but I want to talk about medium fidelity prototypes because this is what most people who do product design have expectations to see when teaching or working with people. We define a medium fidelity prototype as meeting some of the design goals close to scale, made from mostly the correct materials, and each prototype looks and functions with some differences, but they're related. High fidelity prototypes meet most of the design goals, they're at the correct scale, they're made from the best available materials. So you might actually select materials to meet your needs rather than just looking around and using what's there. And high fidelity prototypes each produce prototype look and function the same way.
Mhm.
Low fidelity prototypes, jumping back to low fidelity prototypes, they meet very few design goals. They're not at the right scale. They're made from analogical materials, and each prototype looks and functions wildly different. But the advantage of using low fidelity prototypes is that they only require practical ingenuity and creative problem solving to produce, and you can make them rapidly and in succession. And you and I could also make individual prototypes, share our ideas, meld them, and make another prototype and spend very little time on that exercise itself, saving time and money.
Excellent. Yeah, number of factors there. They're fast for us to make. It is kind of a
Yes.
creative lever. It's a catalyst for something. It gives us something to put into a customer's hands to get feedback on. And the element that I always think about low fidelity prototypes that I'm sure is in your work as well is they look like they're supposed to change, right? We're not giving the customer something or even the engineer something to say, here, go, this is what we're going to do. No, it looks rough and like we are evolving this thing and we're trying to get feedback because that's what we want what to do to make this better.
One of the other things embedded in what you said is that we're handing them an ugly object,
Hmm.
and it's so apparent that it is ugly that they know, the holder knows that you shouldn't give feedback about how it looks. And it allows that person to give feedback in areas where it might actually matter.
But I love that, thinking about that dimension of the ugly object, right? And focusing on the utility and
Right.
suppose the aesthetics at that point. So as you have seen hundreds, if not thousands of students at this point go through the kitchen, learn this process of prototyping, your focus is engineering students of all flavors, right? Different types of engineering
That's right.
programs. But ultimately, right, my background's in engineering as well. We're trying to
Yep.
develop a product that creates value, solves a problem for a customer. This is going to be hard to do in the time we have probably, but can you briefly take us through the process that they're learning, the students are
Yeah.
learning, to go from that idea, that insight, to something that could be launched to a marketplace to solve a customer's problem?
Absolutely. The first thing to know is that there are many different product development processes if we're talking about
Mhm.
any industry, and there's not going to be a perfect one. And that's actually freeing. So as an educator or as somebody who's going through a product development process, just as long as you adhere to whatever process you're doing, you'll be fine.
Right.
The one we teach at the Design Kitchen is called the engineering design process, and it's very similar to many of the other processes. In fact, it's very similar to the architectural design process. It's very similar to the human-centered design process. All of them are cousins.
Mhm.
In our engineering design process, we teach students with 7 steps. 7 steps that start with clarifying the team assignment. In this, students will meet with a client or they'll meet with a user. They themselves will identify as the designer, and they will try to understand more about the emergence of the problem, potential solutions, failed solutions. They'll then do a deep dive and develop something called a design context review, which in industry might actually take months and might be hundreds of pages. They might do this for a short period of the semester or a year. After they've done their background research, they then set some design objectives and constraints. In the medical device world, it might be called design controls. In engineering world, it might just be called objectives and constraints. Parameters might also be a way to frame it. After setting all of those boundaries, after defining your n-dimensional design space, problem space, you then move into the solution space.
Mm.
And this is where you can be free to develop the ideas that you've actually hit pause on until this point. And so you can bring all the ideas that you want to out of the freezer and use your background research, your design controls as lenses to down select for solutions that might actually work. And so you brainstorm divergently and you select convergently. We use something called Pew matrices to select, but there are lots of other ways to do it. And then you get to everybody's favorite step, which is prototyping. And that's step 6. And at step 6, you enter into an iterative loop where you're going to be testing, you're going to be prototyping and then testing. And based on what you learn, you go back to prototyping. And this is where we try to spend 51% of every design experience is in the prototyping, testing, and iterating. And that means we race through the front half in order to get to a point where the students are free
Mm.
to test out their ideas and their assumptions and then loop back around. And they might get feedback from users, they might get feedback from their client, they might get expert feedback from myself or other instructors, but we really want them to immerse themselves in physical and digital building.
Excellent. Okay. So I appreciate you emphasized as you went through that the first half of this, right, the first 3 things we're doing is really focused on getting clarity about the problem and what it
Yes.
is we're trying to solve, right? I think by human nature, many of us are wired to, we hear something that sounds like a problem and we're wired to jump into the solution, right? And
Right.
it's hard to actually back that up, and we kind of need a process to prevent ourselves from doing that, because we can end up building the wrong thing. Can you just talk more about what you've seen with students and like the challenges in actually going through those 3 steps there to understand the problem more clearly?
Sure. And I'll just say that it's not just students. Around the world, when we do workshops, professionals, experts, everybody wants to jump straight into the solution space.
Hmm.
And we have to develop techniques to slow down. One of these is this freezer concept. If you come up with an idea or a solution, you put it in the freezer. And that gives you permission to appreciate the quality of the idea, but pause on when you're going to evaluate that. There are so many challenges with moving into the solution space. You can solve the wrong problem. You can solve a
Right.
problem that's already been solved. You can develop something that's already been developed. You can try something that others have shown won't work. Um, the history of brainstorming is one that was developed by an advertising executive, and his rules of brainstorming involved collecting as much information as you possibly can about a particular topic and marinating on that and letting your subconscious mind form connections between things that shouldn't be joined together. And
Mhm.
then when forcing yourself to develop new solution ideas, you are capable of developing something that no one has developed before. You cannot get to a new solution without spending time understanding the problem, the context, and setting design controls. And in fact, when we work with clients at the Design Kitchen, they're coming to us because they legitimately cannot solve the problem. They've already thought through all the ideas they know as experts in their field. They want somebody to spend deep time in the first 3 or 4 steps of the problem space before trying to solve it.
Yeah, because then hopefully we're not making the same assumptions as others have made, right? We're digging deeply and we have a fresh look at that. You said something about the history of brainstorming, meditating, letting a lot of information congeal that you take. How do you think about this being a lone innovator versus a collaborative effort for innovation?
Hmm. I think there's a myth about the lone innovator. I don't know whether you agree with me or not, but I think that champions like people we champion, like Steve Jobs or Jim Henson or Thomas Edison, these individuals actually represent a, a, an immense number of humans who supported them in order to
Mhm.
accomplish what they needed to. And I always work better in teams. I personally
Mhm.
always work better in teams. One of the things that I like to tell students and other people is work with people who are smarter than you and work with people who think differently than you. You will be better as a result of that. And
Absolutely.
I try to do that as well. I like to talk to my students about how much you can accomplish as one person with person hours and how much you can accomplish with many people as person hours, and to try and divide up your time so that you're somewhere in between everybody working completely alone and everybody working on top of each other.
Right.
And I think that the lone innovator is a myth.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. As you look into the examples you gave, like Edison, right, the number of people that were involved, he was great at marketing more than pretty much anything else. The activity we need for innovation, different perspectives, different backgrounds, knowledge of different disciplines to bring together, right, to solve problems in interesting new ways that actually create value. So that's really important. Okay, so you guys applied the 7-step process. And just to be clear, I want to make sure that we have the names for these because I think I missed something here. So we're going to start by clarifying the assignment, right? The problem that we're trying to conquer and maybe look into some failed solutions and like. You do a design context review, which is really a deep dive on our getting an understanding of the problem. You do design objectives and constraints. And that gives us the background on the problem. And then you move into solution. What do you call the next part then? Moving in this. Oh, we have a diagram. Fantastic.
Yeah, we have a diagram here, the engineering design process. The left-hand side is the problem space, the right-hand side is the solution space. And after we've defined our design criteria, we move into developing solution options, which is brainstorming. And
Yep.
then we evaluate solutions. So this is the decision point here. And so then we move into prototyping and testing, and this is where we have this iterative loop that we move in and back and forth.
Okay, excellent. Very good. Thank you for that. And the iteration is very important. To help us relate to this a little bit more, can you share an example maybe of something the kitchen has been working on and just how prototyping was a part of that?
Oh, great question. So I'm going to share two projects that we've worked on that I'm really proud of. The first one is for the giraffes at the Houston Zoo. So any any animals in captivity are mandated by the USDA to have some form of enrichment, and that could be behavioral, it could be physical, or it could be mental. We love working with the Houston Zoo. They're actually our best client because every animal there is a new challenge of some form of fun or play that they need. We've worked with the orangutans to develop a maze that has a magnet that you pull a ball through. We've worked with the Red River hogs for them to have a giant polyhedra that they have to move around with their snout in order to get toys and food to fall out. And we've worked with the giraffes. In the wild, it takes giraffes 8 hours to eat. And they eat from a tree called the acacia tree, which has long thorns and short leaves. And their tongues have adapted to be outside for long periods of time and to resist getting sunburn. Now, in captivity, they're fed and they eat right away. And that makes them restless. They're used to spending 8 hours eating. We were challenged by the Houston Zoo to extend their feeding time to more closely mimic the natural conditions. And we did this project 4 times. And the first time we did it, we came up with something which, when we tested with the giraffes, they didn't touch it at all. The second time when we tested with the giraffes, it didn't hold enough hay. The third time when we tested it, we had a trash can that we wrapped bamboo around with some wire to hold the bamboo on. It held enough hay, but there was wire which bound it, and that was dangerous for the giraffes. It was the 4th time that we tackled this project. So 2 years later, that they finally developed a hay-shaped box. And that hay-shaped box is also used natural fiber to wrap it around that they wouldn't eat, but was safe to do it. And that hay-shaped box is used every single day by the giraffes in the Houston Zoo and have been for almost 10 years. And if you go to the Houston Zoo's website, you can see on their webcam, their live webcam, the giraffes eating from it right now. And so that is a project we're really proud of. And other zoos have adopted this particular method of feeding based on our solution.
Love that. And if you go to the Houston Zoo, you can walk out the front gate to the Rice campus across the street, so you will be close by.
It's another reason they're a great client, because our students can
Absolutely.
immediately go over and work with them.
That's
We
fantastic.
love the handlers at the zoo.
Love the
second
giraffe
example-
story. Yeah, what's the second example?
The second example was immediately when the world shut down in March during COVID. We rapidly developed a bridge ventilator called the Apollo BVM. And we basically spent 12 to 16 hours a day in the OEDK, the faculty and the staff. And over 1 month, we developed the Apollo BVM and then licensed it out to a company in Houston to be used in the early stages of the COVID pandemic, where we had a shortage of these ventilators. And that was a rapid cycle of prototyping, testing, and iterating back that spanned 6 or 7 people all day, every day throughout the first month long from March 15 to April 15. And it involved working with respiratory therapists. It involved working with pulmonologists who would come in and test out the device, and then using the tools of the OEDK in order to produce the next iteration of the combined prototype. And so what's really key about prototyping is that you can prototype one prototype that evolves functions and always works, or you can prototype individual components and evolve those individual components, and then those components can then be joined to the whole prototype in order to test overall function. And we did both of those in parallel.
Fantastic. And both very practical examples, right? Making a difference for people that needed ventilation and certainly making the giraffes happy. And love those applications. So that's great. Thank you for
Thanks.
that. We do have a question from a listener as well to talk about maybe the negative side of prototypes just a bit. Before that, this episode, we have learned a lot about making prototypes valuable and why we use them as product managers to understand product innovation. And I've used prototyping in every product that I've been involved in. However, it is only one part of what we describe as product mastery. And there are 7 areas. And I have a solution for you to help you learn all 7 areas for product mastery. They're based on the 7 research-backed knowledge areas. It's called the Rapid Product Mastery Experience. That's the RPM experience. It also shows you how you can earn professional certification from PDMA, the International Association for Product Managers and Innovators. It is the training that prepares you for greater success and your next career step. If you're serious about creating more value for customers, improving your team, and growing your own career, the RPM experience is for you. And if you're a product VP, you can use this as well. RPM experience will help you develop your product managers and your product teams. Go to productmasterynow.com to learn more about the training and to get started. Once again, that's productmasterynow.com. So Matthew, that question may be about the darker side of prototyping. The notion here is that I think everyone that's listening probably has some experience with prototypes, and we should be using them to understand more about the problem and validating possible solutions. But this listener and others have seen examples of them being used in a leading way. Like, here's our beautiful thing that we're creating for the world. Let me convince you how wonderful it is. And using it not in the way that actually helps us create value for customers. We're using it in a misleading way. Can you talk about this a little bit, and how do we help avoid this?
I've seen this be done best in architecture school and industrial design school. I think there's a conflict, and there's an inherent conflict in producing a prototype which looks elegant and beautiful, but has no functionality. And I think that in those areas are where we need to give counsel to the students who are producing those prototypes and be clear about that functionality and aesthetics are 2 separate and critically important aspects that need to be represented in all prototypes. It's perfectly acceptable on the aesthetic side to choose the ugly prototype, but I think it is less acceptable in order to produce a beautiful prototype which lacks all functionality in order to mislead or to misguide people. Now, one of the ways in which I teach my students about how to have focused client conversations is to bring a prototype to them and have a set of questions that you are hoping that they can answer, and to circulate that with the client beforehand. Show a photo of the prototype, show a video of the prototype with a list of questions that they're seeking to answer, and also a list of assumptions that were embedded into the building of that particular prototype. And what that does is it gives the client the ability to say, I believe one or more of your assumptions was ill-formed. Instead, let's revise these assumptions to be the following. So I think what I'm advocating here is to educate the individuals in which you're going to be presenting your prototypes to, and to have a focused conversation which allows both sides to both inform and check the assumptions that create the prototypes. Now, often the people that are probably presenting these misguided prototypes, they might need this the most. And so maybe it is upon us as educators to actually set this as standards, that the discussion with clients should be give and take with some ground rules that you're setting.
Yeah, this certainly isn't my quote. I'm sure you're familiar with it as well. What I tell students and people that I train is to fall in love with the problem and not the solution. And it's that, as an engineer, I get invested in my baby. We use that language, like, I made this baby, I brought this thing into existence that didn't exist before. But we have to avoid that and really love the problem. And the beautiful thing about prototyping is we don't feel bad about throwing it away and moving on to the next iteration.
Yeah, one of the things we do with low fidelity prototyping is that at the end of the experience, I'll save 20% of the time to cannibalize those prototypes and either put the materials back or use them to build new ones. And so we bake that into the process of how to teach low fidelity prototyping. Boy, you really brought up an important issue about loving the process and not necessarily falling in love with the product, because that also relates to how you give and receive feedback. Is that the feedback about needs to be process oriented and not often solution or product or end result focused.
Right. Absolutely. Understanding the problem more deeply. Very good.
Yeah.
There's one quick thing you mentioned that I just want to ask about too. As we were talking about that, you said giving a picture or a video of the prototype. I find as I've worked with people, their brains start behaving differently when they're physically touching something. And I imagine you're doing that as many times as you can. There may be times that you can't make the physical prototype available. I just wanted to get your insights on that as well.
Yeah, I think the IDEO quote of a picture's worth 1,000 words and a prototype's worth 1,000 meetings
Right.
is the most appropriate at this point. My advice for sending a video and a photo of a prototype to a client beforehand assumes that at some point you're going to put it in their hands and very immediately. There is something to be said for handing a prototype to a client that they can touch, and I think it's critical to get to that point. When you ask somebody to draw you a picture, I hear this so much, not just students, but everybody says, "Oh, I'm not very good at drawing." It doesn't matter.
Right.
You hear the same thing about prototyping. "I'm not very good at prototyping." That doesn't matter. You should build to learn, and whatever you produce is going to be wonderful and beautiful and be a representation of the ideas inside of your brain. And so we have to get our designers, we have to get our students, we have to get everybody over this hump of "I'm not good at prototyping."
Right. Love that. Really good. And we do like quotes around here. You just shared one. I don't know if that's the quote you want to double down on or if you have something else to share with us.
I want to share a different quote. And that quote is something that I try and think about when I'm coaching my students. Years from now, students that I work with, I want them to remember, make defensible decisions. The process of engineering design, the process of product design, it involves a series of steps with decision points. And at each decision point, I want my students and anybody who is observing it to understand what led to the decisions that were made. And I'm not even concerned with my students making the right choice. And I tell them this, it's okay if you get the wrong answer. But what you have to do is make a defensible decision that you can describe to us. And then if you made maybe a wrong decision, we can go backwards to that decision point and go in a different direction. But you must use evidence and data to support these decisions. You cannot simply go off, "I have a feeling."
Right.
And then I challenge my students to actually be able to articulate that. And that conversation I find is the most valuable that I can have with somebody that I'm mentoring over time, where they can say, "I saw this and I collected this evidence and I read these papers and therefore I made this decision." And I might say, "That sounds reasonable." Or I might say, "Well, actually, there's some papers that you didn't know about that I'd love to introduce you to. And this may change how you think about this fine point, which may make you go in a different direction." So ultimately, I want my students to make defensible decisions.
Fantastic. Like the quote, like the reasoning behind it as well. How can listeners find out more about the work you're doing, more about the kitchen there, this fantastic makerspace, it sounds like? Anything you want to share about what's going on with Rice?
I've had a great time talking about the Design Kitchen with you, and I'd love for people to follow along. The website is really easy to remember. It's oedk.rice.edu, and I'm sure we can share that. You can follow along with the OEDK by signing up for their newsletter. You can also look at the master's program that I run, which prepares students for professional practice in medical device development. And that one's called GMI, Global Medical Innovation. And that's gmi.rice.edu. And those are the two best ways for everybody to follow the programs that we have here at Rice. And they could also follow me on my LinkedIn page where I post about things that my students are doing and our program's doing.
Fantastic. We'll make sure all those links are in the article that we'll create for this episode. And just to be clear for listeners, because a lot of listeners have kids that are getting ready to go to college, some getting ready for graduate school, some of us are interested in going back to graduate school. Your design program, when I did the introduction, we talked about you teach this first design, prototyping, and fabrication course. This is targeted at undergraduate students, correct?
Yes, the engineering design program at the OEDK is for undergraduate students.
Fantastic.
We also have the graduate program that I run, Global Medical Innovation, which is targeted for graduate students, and that's a professional master's program.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's certainly a hot area. A lot of people moving into medical devices, and this would be a good place to get experience. So glad to know about that as well. And we'll have the LinkedIn profile also. Matthew, really appreciate you joining us and talking some about prototyping with us.
Thanks. I love talking about prototyping, and this has been a wonderful experience.
Fantastic. Glad it was. I enjoyed our conversation as well. For listeners, if you do want that written article of everything we discussed and that Matthew shared with us, go to productmasterynow.com/509. As always, keep innovating.
Thank you for listening to Product Mastery Now, where product leaders and managers gain product mastery through practical knowledge, influence, and confidence. By listening, you are becoming a product master, creating products customers love. Find additional resources at productmasterynow.com. Keep innovating.